about U.S.-China. Much of what's been on investors' minds these days is changes in the investment regime, beefing up of the CFIUS, potential export controls from the United States on emerging and foundational technologies, but also China trying to make sure that some of its technologies are not taken out. Is there generally a sense that as an investor, there's a not for sale sign on American tech firms? If you're an investor from China, are we still going to be able to have this kind of cooperation with VCs, and now that FIRMA and CFIUS are able to have jurisdiction over non-controlling investments, how do you see this changing the financing of investment going forward between US and China?
So it's me?
Yes.
Okay. What 2 years made difference, right? I think 2 years ago, there was what do you call China price, that Chinese company coming to the United States, you give 30% more higher. Mm-hmm. And now there's no sale sign. I think there's lots of fears from both countries to play that. So what do they say with the trade war? When two elephants fights, it's the grass gets hurt. And I think technology cooperations, and this is a problem like that. And I'll give you an example that despite you think China has AI, I think China's AI is mostly in consumer use. But I think the US is much better in enterprises and industrial AI. And then we were trying to put a consortium together, Japanese, Southeast Asia, Chinese, and to bring this technology to China, because we think they have so-called symbolic AI, which is not traditional machine learning, and it would be great if you put into chips, and then it can enable EV cars to drive autonomously. Because today's AI is just not very much reliable. You know, it's a black box. When they made a mistake, you don't know why make a mistake. And I think, look at the Boeing, you know, maybe they have these kind of issues. But when you have a symbolic AI, which is these companies out of California, and we were trying to do that, and because of the CFIUS, because of the export controls, and I think we found it's very, very difficult to do it because the political environment is there. And I think now U.S. has, 21 sectors that basically, they don't say the bar to China, but you really have to take a look at it. And that creates some difficulties for funds to make investment. And I know a large fund, they just raised almost $2 billion. They're actually, most of the money come from the United States, but because they have a few partners, they are not US citizens. So they are not qualified as a US fund. So when they make a company investment in a United States company, which they've been doing that for the last almost 10, 20 years, the company they invest is subject to some kind of regulations on that. And I think that is not very, very good for American companies seeking fundings, and especially today, technology has no borders. I think China today, lots of people get scared about China. It's not, I don't think China has the world's leading technologies. In consumer sector, yes. You know, what I think is in everything about real estate, and spending, food, payments, even banking, Chinese are leading. But if you look at everything else, you just mentioned two sectors. China is good, AI and clean technology. What about others? China is not leading. You look at a world globalist innovation index. China as a country is ranked as 17th. But the consumer companies, you have Alibaba, you have Tencent, it's scary because their size is so huge. Mm-hmm. And so you hear a lot of that. But in terms of industry, China needs fundamental technologies. And I think China is still behind. That's why there's lots of companies trying to either buying or copying or using other ways to obtain technologies. But for US company, I think the technology today needs a market in order to promote innovations. You can't just sit in a room and say, I want to be innovative. So you have to really go to market where it has a needs. And where's the biggest needs? It's in China. So, this company called the BASF just announced the $10 billion US investment for the first time. Chinese government allowed them to have 100% refinery, $10 billion. And because that's the technology, and they put there and ask them why. They said 37% of chemical market is in China. And in 10 years, it's going to be 50. And you take a look at, you ask American company, large companies, their growth has really come from Chinese market. And sometimes they're the single largest market, and sometimes they're China versus the rest of the world. So I think barring technologies going to China to access Chinese market, it's not good for U.S. company.